is the Tudor Black Bay Pro. Too thick? Let's talk about it.
You're never gonna look back, 'cause damn, I was built to last. You move slow and I move fast, and that's facts. Only I can make a change, slowly take a step today. I will never be the same, 'cause that's what it takes.
So let's talk about one of the greatest Explorer watches ever made. Back in 1971, Rolex introduced the Explorer 2 model 1655. Now this had a steel case and had a pencil hour and minute hand, and then it also had a fourth hand, or an orange hand. Now that fourth hand moved around the dial once every 24 hours versus once every 12 hours like a normal hour hand. And the reason that Rolex did this is so that people that were into certain types of exploring, right, like spelunking, or let's say someone was to explore across a pole, right, where the sun's not rising and setting every 12 hours, you know, this 24-hour bezel with a 24-hour hand would let that explorer know, just at a quick glance, if it was AM, right, like 6 o'clock AM versus 6 o'clock PM, or how it would show on the metal bezel at 6 PM would be 1800. This is also how we get the military time that's used by the military, right? It's a 24-hour time clock versus just a 12-hour time clock. Now, some of the major features on an Explorer's watch is number one, the material that it's made out of. So if you are exploring among rocks, ice, dirt, that kind of thing, one of the better materials that you would have at your disposal would be steel. Now, while titanium is certainly a lighter weight metal, you know, there are some disadvantages with titanium, right? Shock resistance. Another downside about titanium is it actually shows up scratches, I think even more so than regular steel. Another thing that you need with an Explorer's watch is you need it to be durable to the elements, right? So it would need to be a waterproof case. You also would want it to be dustproof as well. And so on the Explorer 2 that Rolex came out with, it has a fixed steel bezel. You don't need the bezel rotating. And if you've ever seen even vintage dive watches, right, vintage Submariners, as they get exposed to dust and grime, it can actually make it so that the bezel isn't able to turn anymore. So you just don't need a rotating bezel to collect grime when you're exploring, right, with a watch, when you're cave diving, when you're trying to cross the poles. It's just not necessary. Another key feature that you would want in an Explorer's watch is you actually want it to be thin. Rolex has really nailed the field watch concept with the Explorer 2. One of the reasons is because it wears so thin. Because if you're out exploring, right, going through a cave, climbing a mountain, that kind of thing, you're going to be going through various levels of exertion, you know, throughout the day. And just simply going into a shaded area, right, or climbing up onto a face where you're exposed to wind, you know, you can make it to the top of a mountain or a peak, or you might sit down and plan your route. And in these situations, you're going to be exposed to temperature swings, right? Under physical exertion, right, you start to sweat. You start sweating and then you take a break. That cold wind or cold temperature, especially if there's precipitation on your body, it can really make you feel cold really quickly. And so, you know, for explorers, it's important to have a watch that's thin, so that as they're adding or taking off layers, the watch is able to easily slide under base layers, mid layers, insulating layers, waterproof layers, and then on top of that, you might be putting on and off gloves, right? So you don't want a large, bulky case on your wrist for those kind of situations. You're complicating things for yourself. Another thing that a lot of explorers face is having to deal with their tackle, right? Their harnesses, their ropes, whether they're roped into, anchor points on a cliff, or maybe they're roped into their partner. These are all realities of an explorer, and you don't want a thick, bulky watch that might get tangled up in your rigging. So another reason why I think that Rolex with their Explorer 2 has made a point to make it a very thin watch. It sits very flat on the wrist. So Tudor is a brand that I've owned several of their watches, and I enjoy them. I really do. But they tend to have a habit of what I call tripping at the finish line, right? They get 90% of the way there, and then they just F up a certain feature, right? The Tudor Black Bay GMT 41mm case, awesome, but it doesn't need to be more than 14.5mm thick. It's just becomes slab-sided to the point where for a lot of people it ends up being a no-go for them. I really enjoy my Tudor Royale, the 38mm integrated case design, right? Overall, I think it looks great. And then at 3 o'clock, they put this oddly placed date window. It just kind of F's everything up. The Black Bay 58 dive watch, which I still think will be a future classic, but they do a great job with the vintage styling of it. They put a triangle loom pip at 12, rectangular loom pips at 3, 6, and 9. They have the pencil style minute hand, and then Tudor's classic snowflake hand, which I've no problem with. But then they go and they put, because as if they didn't use enough different shapes on the dial, they go and they put round loom pips at the 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, at 10 and 11 o'clock. They could have just used the square loom pips that so many Tudor fans would have loved to see them use, reminiscent of the Tudor snowflake. But no, Tudor doesn't do that. I purchased the Black Bay 58 in navy myself. Overall, it's a good looking watch, right? I don't want to dog it too much, but it's this nice blue dial, blue and white dial, and then as you turn down the lights, what naturally you would think of for them using the color of loom should be a blue loom, right? But no, Tudor went and tripped at the finish line once again and went with green because, why not? We're Tudor. We're gonna F it up that way. When the Tudor Black Bay GMT movement came out, it really struggled with having a date wheel issue that a lot of people posted about online. And Tudor did the right thing and extended the warranty for people that already owned their GMT piece. And then as a brand, they further extended the warranties on new purchased watches to 5 years, which is awesome, right? I mean, Tudor standing by the product, that's a good thing to see. But they spent a lot of money investing in the development of a true GMT movement, which is great. But that GMT movement, I believe, is over 7mm thick just by itself. And one of the features of a quality watch is being able to do it in a compact size. So I think in the wristwatch game, size does matter. It's inverse. Bigger isn't better. Being able to do something in a more compact form factor is actually more impressive than creating a giant 14.5mm thick true GMT movement. Now this brings us to Tudor and their Black Bay Pro release of 2022. And one of the big criticisms that, you know, what we as people, what we as watch collectors really wanted to see was a Black Bay GMT in the Black Bay 58 size case, because a lot of people really appreciate the case dimensions of that Black Bay 58, and a lot of people find the Tudor GMT, the Pepsi or Diet Pepsi model, to be a little slab-sided and a little bit thick, and rightfully so. For a watch that you are wanting to adventure with, or maybe go on travels with, you know, you want a versatile piece, and a thinner piece is just more versatile than the 14.7 millimeter size of the Tudor Black Bay GMT. So in 2022, when Tudor released the Black Bay Pro, it started getting a lot of criticism for being too thick. Some of the specs I'm seeing is about 14.6 millimeters tall. They did a good job with keeping the width of the case proportion width down to 39 millimeters, which is actually in line with the original Rolex Explorer 2, the 1655. But 1655 was definitely not 14 millimeters thick. As Tudor seems to almost becoming more of a Rolex homage brand, I think that they were really set up to be able to knock this one out of the park. And what they did was they went the cheap route. They tried to use their pre-existing GMT movement, which really doesn't afford them the ability to make the 1655 homage in a reasonable size. I think the Black Bay Pro release from Tudor was a big miss. So my recommendation is, even if you want it, don't pay over retail on it. They're going to become more available in time. Isn't a piece that I would recommend paying over retail on. Should just have a little bit of patience, and you'll be able to get one at a reasonable price. So those are my thoughts on the Tudor Black Bay Pro